get that feeling. Like your brain is just completely full. Like you're trying to remember a grocery list while also planning out your day. Oh, yeah, what was that person's name again? Today we're diving into working memory. You know that mental juggling act that lets us hold on to information just long enough to actually use it, but here's the thing. Scientists have been debating for ages why this mental workspace seems so limited. Is it literally like a storage issue or something else? We've got some really interesting research from Brown University that helps us unpack all of this, and they use a pretty wild tool to figure this out, too, a computer model of the brain itself. I am really curious about this research. It seems like they focused on parts of the brain we don't usually associate with working memory, like the basal ganglia.
That's right. Most research focuses on the prefrontal cortex as the main stage for working memory, but this study suggests a much more intricate interplay of brain regions. The basal ganglia, traditionally linked to movement and habit formation, is going to play a crucial role in how we learn to manage the information in our mental workspace.
So it's not just about where the information is stored, but about how efficiently our brains can access and use it.
Exactly. Think of it this way. Imagine your working memory as a workshop. The prefrontal cortex might be the workbench itself, but the basal ganglia are the tools and organizational systems that let you actually do something with the materials you've got.
Okay, that makes sense. But how did this computer model actually reveal that?
Well, they put this model through its paces, right, with various memory tasks, and what's fascinating is that the model actually performed worse when it had a massive amount of storage capacity, but lacked efficient learning mechanisms.
That's counterintuitive. I would thought more storage would automatically mean better memory performance.
It seems that way, right? But think about it. If you have a giant warehouse full of random stuff and no system for organizing or retrieving anything, it's not going to be very useful. The same principle applies to working memory. It's not just about raw space. It's about having the right strategies to manage the information effectively.
So is that where chunking comes in? I remember reading that our brains group similar information together to make it easier to remember, like how we remember phone numbers. We chunk them into those familiar 3 or 4-digit groups.
Chunking is a brilliant example of the brain's efficiency in action. It's a way of compressing information, making it more manageable within the limits of our working memory.
It seems like chunking is something we learn to do over time, right? So how does the brain actually get better at it?
That's where dopamine comes in. The model showed that when it successfully chunked information, dopamine acted as a reinforcement signal, essentially telling the brain, hey, that strategy worked, do that again. This reinforced the chunking behavior, leading to more efficient learning and memory management.
So dopamine isn't just about feeling good. It's like a coach for our brains, helping us develop those winning memory strategies. I'm starting to see why this research could be so significant.
Absolutely. And this dopamine connection gets even more intriguing when we consider conditions like Parkinson's disease, where dopamine production is disrupted. The model showed that when dopamine signaling was impaired, it struggled to learn and apply those efficient chunking strategies.
So it's possible that working memory problems in Parkinson's might not just be about forgetting things, but about a difficulty in learning how to organize and manage information effectively due to this dopamine disruption.
Precisely. And that opens up a whole new way of thinking about treatment approaches. What if we could target these learning mechanisms in the basal ganglia to improve working memory function in these conditions? That's what makes this research so potentially groundbreaking.
This is all incredibly fascinating, but I have to admit I'm still wrapping my head around the idea that our working memory limits might be more about learning than just storage capacity.
It's a paradigm shift, isn't it? It challenges our assumptions about how our brains work and suggests that even something as seemingly fundamental as working memory is shaped by learning and experience. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. We haven't even touched on the implications for conditions like ADHD or the potential for cognitive training to enhance our mental agility.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. I can't wait to dive deeper into those aspects. Don't go anywhere, deep divers. We'll be back in a moment to explore even more fascinating insights from this research. All right, we're back. And I'm still pondering this whole idea that working memory is more about learning than just storage space. Our brains are way more adaptable than we give them credit for, right?
Absolutely. That's one of the key takeaways from this research. The brain's remarkable plasticity. We often think of working memory as this fixed capacity, but what if it's more like a muscle we can train and strengthen? This study certainly seems to point in that direction.
So are you saying we could potentially train our brains to be better at chunking? and other memory strategies? Like, could I actually improve my mental juggling skills through practice?
There's growing evidence that suggests that's possible. Targeted cognitive training programs have shown some really promising results in enhancing working memory capacity and efficiency. It's a fascinating area of research, too, with potential implications for everyone, from students who are struggling with focus to older adults experiencing age-related cognitive decline.
That's incredibly hopeful. It's like instead of just accepting our perceived limitations, we can actively work to push those boundaries.
And remember, this research also highlights the role of dopamine in this learning process. It's not just about feeling good, right? It's the driving force behind our brain's ability to adapt and refine those memory strategies. This suggests that activities that boost dopamine naturally, like exercise or engaging mental challenges, could potentially have a really positive impact on our working memory.
So taking care of our overall well-being can actually make us sharper mentally. I like the sound of that. But going back to the research for a moment, I'm curious about the implications for conditions like ADHD, which we know also involve dopamine disruptions.
That's a great point. If dopamine is so crucial for learning and applying those efficient memory strategies, it makes sense that disruptions in dopamine signaling, like we see in ADHD, could contribute to working memory challenges. This study's focus on the basal ganglia adds another layer to that understanding, too.
You mentioned earlier that the basal ganglia are traditionally associated with movement and habits. So how does that tie into working memory and conditions like ADHD?
Well, it's all about the interplay of different brain regions, right?
Yeah.
The prefrontal cortex is kind of like the executive center of working memory, but the basal ganglia seem to be crucial for developing those automatic routines and strategies that make working memory more efficient. In ADHD, it's possible that difficulties in these basal ganglia functions contribute to those challenges with regulating attention and managing information effectively.
So instead of just viewing ADHD as a problem with focus, this research suggests it might also involve difficulties in building those underlying cognitive habits that support working memory. That's a really different way of looking at it.
Exactly. And this shift in perspective could have really significant implications for treatment approaches, too. So instead of solely focusing on managing symptoms, what if we could target those learning processes in the basal ganglia to address the root of the issue? It's an exciting avenue for future research.
I'm really struck by how this research challenges our traditional understanding of working memory. It's not just a passive storage space, is it? It's a dynamic system shaped by learning, experience, and even the intricate dance of neurochemicals like dopamine.
That's what makes neuroscience so fascinating. The more we learn about the brain, the more we realize
Yeah.
how much we still don't know. This study opens up a whole new world of possibilities for understanding not just working memory, but the very essence of how we learn and adapt to the world around us.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from dopamine's role as a brain coach to the potential for training our working memory like a muscle. But before we wrap things up, I want to touch on one more point that really resonated with me: the interconnectedness of the brain.
That's a really fundamental principle that this study illustrates so beautifully. We often talk about specific brain regions, right, as if they operate in isolation. But the reality is far more complex. The brain is like a symphony of interconnected networks. Each region plays a crucial role in the overall harmony of cognitive function.
It's like instead of individual instruments working independently, we're hearing the full orchestra playing together, each section contributing to the richness of the music.
Precisely. This study reminds us to move beyond that reductionist view of the brain and appreciate that intricate dance of interactions that shape our thoughts, our behaviors, and even our limitations.
Okay, deep divers. We've explored the depths of working memory and uncovered some truly mind-bending insights. But before we resurface, let's take a moment to recap those key takeaways and consider what this all means for us.
Absolutely.
So let's crystallize this a little bit. What have we learned about working memory? What are the big takeaways that our listeners should walk away with?
I think first and foremost, it's not about how much your brain can hold right. It's about how well it learns to use what it's got. So think strategy over storage space.
Yeah, and a huge part of that strategy is chunking, right? I mean, we've all experienced this. We group things together to make them easier to remember. It's like our brain's natural compression software.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, the model that they used in the study, it actually did worse when it was given tons of storage but no good learning mechanism. So it's a reminder that even in the brain, efficiency trumps raw capacity.
Which brings us back to dopamine, the unsung hero of this whole process. It's not just about that reward feeling, right? It's actually driving the learning that makes our working memory tick.
Yeah, and the model showed that when you disrupt dopamine, it really messed up its ability to learn to chunk effectively. And this has huge implications for conditions like Parkinson's, ADHD, even schizophrenia, all of which involve those dopamine imbalances.
Yeah, we often think of those as just attention or memory problems, but this suggests that maybe something a little deeper is going on.
It could be that the difficulty lies in the learning processes that are happening in the basal ganglia, that area we talked about. If those aren't working smoothly because of dopamine issues, it kind of throws off the whole working memory system, even if the storage part is technically fine.
It's like having all the ingredients for a delicious cake, but not knowing the recipe or having a wonky oven. You've got the potential, but something is messing up the execution. This is blowing my mind. Any other big takeaways before we wrap up?
I think this study reminds us how much we can influence our own brains.
Yeah.
Working memory. It's not fixed. If it's about learning, then
Yeah.
maybe targeted practice could actually help us get better at it.
Like mental weightlifting. Instead of just accepting that I'm bad with names or whatever it is, maybe I can train those mental muscles to be more agile.
Exactly. And it's not just about individual skills either. This has ripple effects on everything, from decision-making to stress management. A more efficient working memory gives you more mental resources for life.
So deep divers.
Okay.
As you go about your day, I challenge you to pay attention to your working memory in action. Notice those moments where you're juggling information, trying to remember a detail, or struggling to stay focused. And remember this research. It suggests that you're not stuck with the mental hand you were dealt, with practice, and maybe a little boost from that dopamine system. You might be surprised at just how much you can expand your mental workspace. Until next time, keep exploring, keep those brains buzzing, and we'll see you on our next deep dive.